You're listening to Montreal Now with Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall on CJAD 800.
That is James Mennie. He is over at the Montreal Gazette. And Jim, I was watching some of the David Johnston testimony today. The thing I was waiting for was the part where someone yells at someone else, "You can't handle the truth." I mean, it was pretty rough out there. But listen, here's part of the statement that David Johnston actually made as this all began. Brian?
Before I conclude, I think it important that I acknowledge the motion passed last week in the House of Commons. I have deep respect for the House of Commons and for its right to express an opinion on my work. I have heard clearly the disagreement with my recommendations not to call a public inquiry, as well as allegations about my integrity and my independence. These allegations are, put simply, false, and the decision to repeat them does not make them true.
Okay, I was going to say them's fighting words, but he hasn't changed since the beginning, right? He's always said from the get-go, I don't care. This is what I'm doing. This is what I was, mandated to do by the Prime Minister. What do you think?
Absolutely. He said, I wasn't hired by the opposition. I was hired by the government. But that last clip, I think, is very, very important because he is kind of in a very calm and measured and all too rare, unemotional tone of voice that we're not hearing from people involved in politics anymore. That was the essential thing. What you're saying about me is false, and quite clearly alluding to the daily, opposition and media frenzy over his findings. Just because you repeat them, that doesn't make them true. And lots of times and sometimes you guys will concede that politics is a certain amount of theater, and especially with those clips, I guarantee you that clip's going to make all the news casts. But the other problem is, whether rightly or wrongly, and I hate to say it, but it is a factor in politics, David Johnston looks like he knows what he's talking about. David Johnston looks like he's telling the truth. And to a certain extent, you've seen a lot of opposition MPs, opposition parties, kind of hungry, yelling about foreign interference in Canadian elections, which is very, very important. But even the most cursory examination will find that the last thing on their minds is foreign interference in Canadian elections. What they want to do is beat up the Trudeau government, which I guess, that's their job, that's politics. But in this day and age, especially with conservatives, adopting the Donald Trump playbook in terms of vilifying people at a personal level, that'll generate a lot of comments from bots on the internet. But in the end, I think, rightly or wrongly, and everyone knows I'm not a fan of Justin Trudeau, but all Trudeau has to do is keep supporting Johnston. All Trudeau has to do is keep saying, repeating what Johnston's been saying, which is what is being said about him isn't true. Let's go through the public hearings. If people want to say that's a sham, well, that'll be fine too. But I think in this particular instance, Mr. Johnston is proving to be perhaps a harder target, as we say in the military, than the opposition imagined. And I think the pushback, people say, oh, he's flooding democracy. Well, maybe he is, but the fact is that's the way our democracy works. He works for the government. He's going to see this through. I will not be deterred. That was something else that he said in his statement. And I just found it rather interesting, because even though if you just walked into this not having heard a word about, the whole Chinese interference coverage, and frankly, I think a lot of Canadians do fall into that category, you would say, what are they going after this guy for? He appears to have a certain amount of gravitas, and in this day, appearances count. I may be sounding too cynical here, but I'm not entirely sure this is going to be the route for the Trudeau Liberals that the opposition thinks is going to be.
That's an interesting, you kind of wonder at some point, Jim, this idea of sticking to your guns in the face of all this stuff being thrown at them.
Yeah,
it's kind of too late to be changing horses in the middle of a race anyway. So they've kind of won this already, haven't they?
Well, maybe they have, but it's also, you're talking about sticking to your guns, and that's an expression that the vast majority of our listeners understand. And yet here was the leading voice vilifying the personal reputation of David Johnston was Pierre Poilievre. Guess who wasn't at today's hearing?
Right. Okay. Fair enough.
Huh.
So, the whole thing of, I staffed the dirty work out. I just, no, that stuff doesn't work. And I think that there are some people, observers who have written, essays and columns saying right now, even though the polls suggest he could become prime minister, Pierre Poilievre is just burning every single bridge behind him and in front of him.
Yeah.
With the way he's behaving.
Yeah, it's the approach, right? It's all about the approach.
Yeah.
Mad dog.
I'm intrigued by your next headline here. So downtown is in shambles, we know, and you think it might take a recession to revive downtown Montreal?
Well, it's not my opinion, but listen, back in the dark days of the pandemic, when we were all working from home and things looked pretty grim, I know I sounded like some geezer coming out of the hills wearing rags and walking with a stick saying there has been a fundamental change in how things work and how we live. And now we have, I think it was yesterday it was tabled, but the fact is a report on office vacancy rates in downtown Montreal says that could reach 25% by the end of next year. Which is a bit scary when you think about it. That also includes new construction that's been going on because people are thinking, no, Mennie's a crazy man. Things are going to go back to the way they were. Let's build more office space. But here's the rub. A lot of this is going to depend on people coming back to work. And a lot of people simply will not do that. A lot of people are happy with the hybrid method. Indeed, a lot of employers now, when they renew their leases, apparently, according to this report, when they renew, it's for a smaller amount of space. They're really reducing, as they say, their footprint in the central business district of Montreal. However, it was interesting because one observer pointed out that if there's a recession, and let's say the economic outlook for a lot of people who are working out of their homes right now becomes a little more grim, and if their employers turn around and say, you know what, really, if you want to keep this job, you'll be coming back into the office. And they have that leverage. That might be the kickstart to returning the downtown core of Montreal to where it was, I was going to say pre-pandemic, but that would be a lie because we all know even pre-pandemic, downtown Montreal had major problems. But let's say the Montreal of 10 or 15 years ago. Personally, I don't think that's going to happen. But it does speak volumes that it would require a pronounced economic downturn for things to even start to go back to the way they were.
You know, it's funny, Jim, with respect to that, because I read the same story, and I'm thinking, I agree with you, by the way. I don't think that's going to be a solution, despite one person suggesting that might be a way it goes. But I do think, and I was wrong, by the way, and I've said that before, I did not think it would take us this long, being 3 years plus, to sort of get back to where we were. And clearly, it's taking us that long, and possibly a lot longer. With respect to office space, and I know this is the same problem across the board, not just here, this is a problem across North America, but I wonder how many of those buildings, because let's face it, we're talking about millions and millions of dollars in space, are going to be, I don't know what the word would be, but repurposed maybe as residential space. So there's a shortage in housing. Yeah. You take a building that's sitting empty, you knock down a couple of walls, and suddenly people are moving in and families are moving in because otherwise they'd sit empty and no one wants them to sit empty. I wonder if that's where we're going.
I'd say right now that everything is on the table.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure politicians would be ready to say that out loud at any level of government, but I think that's where we're headed. I know that, and with your guys' line of work, in many cases, you commuted, but you didn't do it on public transit. And I know a lot of people who are in the same boat as me, who, when they sort of adapted to working out of the house, working at home, discovered that the most daunting, soul-destroying aspect of your workday was the commute. You realize how much time was absolutely thrown out the window, standing up, getting to where you were going to go to sit down for 7 hours, and then have the same trip going back home. It's absolutely inconceivable for a lot of people to go back to that way of life, and I think that's going to stick. But you're quite right. Rather than having discussions of what might happen and maybe there's a way around this and we can go back to the way we were. I think, and I've said this before, I think certainly at the municipal level, I think there should be an admission that things have changed, they're not going to change back, and what do we do going down the road? Because you're right, there's going to be a lot of empty real estate out there and a lot of people who need housing. Is some level of government going to have the courage to say, you know what, we'll pick this stuff up at what the developer wanted, but if we have to, we'll eat the loss, but we're going to literally eliminate the housing shortage in Quebec.
I like to think in the back of my mind that's exactly what's happening now. At least that's what I want to believe. Jim, thank you. Appreciate it.
Adamat.